and thank you for joining me on Through the Eyes of Scripture, where we venture to study the Bible and see the world through the eyes of Scripture, or should I say Torah. So, as you can tell, I'm still growing. This is a living, breathing, evolving thing where Yah is growing me and teaching me His Word and restoring me back to my Hebrew heritage and my Hebrew roots and my Hebrew teachings. So you may start hearing me say things like Shalom and Torah or Yahweh, Yehoshua. It's because I am just something in me is changing and coming back to the roots of learning my Hebrew ancestry. The more I do this, the more the Lord helps me, or Yahweh helps me learn and study. And so I don't mean to confuse you, but roll with me as we grow through this journey, and we'll be learning a lot together. And I've also posted videos for us to learn from in the playlist if you want to view those as well. Now, I don't want to get too lost in that. I may have to do a separate video to kind of clarify, and I know I'm always doing separate videos, but as you can tell, as you grow in the Word of Yahweh, you will constantly be learning and sharing what you've learned, or at least that's what I'm doing. But either way, I wanted to discuss the parallels of the Hebrew diaspora and the African diaspora, should I say the Negro diaspora. Now, I didn't say Jewish diaspora. I believe that that's a term that's frequently spread around in the Hebrew world. I did not use that expression simply because in the world that we live in, many people associate Jewish people as being the Gentiles that are currently residing in Israel right now. But that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to the bloodline, blood-born Hebrew Israelites that were subject to the curses for being disobedient to Yah's word. That's what I'm referring to. And so they were 12 tribes that were scattered into captivity through pretty much the nations of the world. So not just the Jews. So that's why I have it listed as the Jew Hebrew diaspora. And then, of course, the African diaspora, or in other words, the Negro diaspora, that went into captivity, and they were scattered all across the world. That's what we'll be looking at today. Now, the first thing, as you can tell, is I've listed biblical references in scriptures, and there are many more, but I've just listed some of the references that will address the scriptures where the Lord, or where Yah said He was going to send the Yahudim, the Israelites, into captivity. And then, of course, I really don't have to list much about the Negro diaspora because that's something that we have all learned, no matter what your ethnic background is. If you grew up in America, and perhaps other parts of the world, we've all learned about the transatlantic slave trade. Now, one of my biggest issues is that there's not much reference or discussed or talked about when it comes to the Arab slave trade, where it was just like the transatlantic slave trade, only it was on the eastern part of the world, and they were going to Asian countries and into other parts of the world of captivity. And so, I wanted to address that because it bothers me a little bit. But then again, the Bible tells us that there will be many false prophets in the last days. But we always have to stick to the scripture. And the scripture tells us, that they would be dispersed into captivity into the nations. And a lot of times, people only look at the captivity in the transatlantic slave trade. But there's a whole nother a whole nother captivity of Hebrews that were scattered into other regions of the world. That's why when Yehoshua returns to gather his children, he's going to gather them from the north, south, east, and west. Not just from the western hemisphere or the northern and southern western hemisphere, from the north, south, east, and west. So let's keep that in perspective. Um, and one thing I wanted to point out is when addressing these parallels. So we have the parallel that Hebrews, they went into captivity. It was prophesied in scripture, and you can reference it. But then, of course, you have the Negroes. Parallel or surprise, coincidence, whatever people want to call it. That was ironic that a whole people were sent into captivity. A group of people went into captivity just as prophesied. If that alone doesn't show you who the true children of Israel are, who the Yahudim are, then I don't know where else it's going to take. But then there's the question that a lot of people ask as well, you know, why did they come from Africa? The true children of Israel should be coming from Israel. And actually, that is something that I wanted to address as well, because there is a migration pattern. And in my studies and in learning all of this stuff, what I've discovered is that they rarely tell us about the migration patterns of the Hebrew people. So that's why when you present this information, a lot of people presume that, it can't be true, that the Negro people cannot be the biblical Hebrews because they come from Africa, not Jerusalem. Well, that's only because nobody really, or not many people understand the migration pattern. And so in my studies, I discovered basically, of course, we came from Jerusalem and we entered into Eastern Africa. Now, it's not a surprise. This is something they've done all throughout the Bible. Jacob went into Egypt. Yehoshua was taken into Egypt. 10 of the 12 tribes went into Egypt to get corn. So, therefore, if we came from Jerusalem, naturally, when migrating out, where are we going to go? The same place we've always gone, right back into East Africa. And then the pattern continues and spreads from East Africa into Central Africa into West Africa. And from West Africa, you have another migration. It goes down into Southeast Africa, which is the Bantu migration. So that was the migration pattern. But here's a European Jew who actually does address the migration pattern as well, and exposes the fact that the Negro are the true children of Israel.
Now, if you do research, you will find out that in Africa, in Black Africa, they're looking for Jews only in Ethiopia. They bring Jews only from Ethiopia because the true Jews, according to the Bible, you can check it in the Bible, you can read Job 30:30 and some other places. They have never been white. They have been people of color. And they have not stopped in Ethiopia. They were in Ethiopia, Sudan, and they have settled in West Africa.
Okay, so I mentioned their migration pattern started from the eastern portion of Africa into Central and across to West Africa. And then, of course, you can look at other things like the dates that the captivity was occurring to develop a better understanding of the migration pattern. So what you'll see is around the 8th century, I believe, 8th century AD, you have the slave trade that was happening with the Arab slave trade, and they were taking captives from Eastern Africa and Central Africa. Now, if you move along through time, what you'll find is that around I believe, the 15th century, there were the Europeans ended up taking the slaves from the western portion of Africa. Around the 8th century, the captives and the slaves were coming from the eastern portion of Africa and the central portion of Africa. And then by the 15th century, they'd migrated so far into West Africa that they were being taken from the western portion of West Africa by Europeans to the west and the Arabs to the right. And the Arabs continued to take captives all the way up until, honestly, legally, I believe around, they say the last century, but even then, there's a lot of sketchy details surrounding that, because there's a lot of Hebrews that are still in captivity today. Although it may not be legal, it still goes on. which honestly falls in line with biblical prophecy, because when Yahushua returns, he will be returning to pull us out of captivity. So what does that mean for the Western Hemisphere? I'm not certain. We definitely would have to do a lot more studying. I'm just letting you know what Scripture says. But of course, continuing in Scripture, we're going to look at Kings 18, verses 11 through 12. What we'll find is it is talking about the captivity, because even before the 8th century, a lot of the tribes, 10 of the tribes, went into captivity to Assyria. So this is of course after the Egyptian captivity, because we have several major captivities in our Hebrew history. We were originally in captivity to Egypt. After we were delivered from Egypt, we ended up going back into captivity to Assyria. After our captivity from Assyria, there was the Babylonians who conquered the Assyrians. We were in captivity to the Babylonians. Now, some of us were released during that period of time as well from the Babylonians, but of course, Israel is known for going back in captivity. So then there was the Medo-Persian captivity, and they ended up, you know, holding Hebrews as well. Although a lot of by this time, a lot of our tribes, especially the northern tribe, most of them were kind of put into captivity in Syria, and a lot of them are still there to this day, which we'll address. But that's why I ended up to the point where by the time we got into certain parts of our captivity, it was mostly only the Jews, which would have been the southern kingdom, Judah. So just continuing, we also had the Greek captivity, I believe, and then there was the Roman captivity. So if I'm in error, I'll definitely make a point to highlight that in the video. But basically, those are the cores of our captivity. And then, of course, as we progress forward in time, that's when you start seeing the Hebrews in captivity to the Arabs and scattered through all the nations, and then the captivity into the Europeans. But I wanted to clarify something about the Assyrian captivity. Now, the Assyrian captivity in Kings chapter 18, verses 11 through 12 says, "And the king of Syria did carry away Israel into Assyria, and put them in Halah, in Harbor, by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes, because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord their God, but transgressed his covenant, and all that Moses, the servants of the Lord, commanded, and would not hear them, nor do to them." And that was actually, 2 Kings chapter 18, verses 11 through 12. Now, we also have 1 Chronicles 5, verse 26. "And the Lord of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, and the spirit of Tilgath-Pilneser." So if I messed that word up, I apologize. But the king of Assyria as well. "And he carried them away, even the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half of Manasseh, and brought them into Halah, and Habor, and Harah, and to the river Gozan, unto this day." Unto this day. I wanted to highlight that. So when you hear other Hebrew camps, false Hebrews, spreading lies and division in their false 12 tribes chart, keep in mind one of the things the scripture points out is that Gadites, Manasseh, and Reubenites, or half of Manasseh, these tribes are located in those locations unto this day. To this day. So it's present. And it's interesting because if you do a search, you will find that there are Negro people in this area. And this area is Syria. What we want to understand is that Assyria, I said Syria earlier, I'm sorry. What we want to understand is that Assyria was an ancient name that was used during those times. So the location has not changed, only the names have changed. And I believe that that was done, of course, in another way to continue to mislead people. But what you'll find is that the land Assyria is modern day, um, basically a huge chunk of Iraq, Iran, Syria, um, Turkey, those conglomerate regions is what was our ancient biblical, or was the ancient land of Assyria. And if you look in those areas, you will find Negro people. Now, the only thing that I'm able to find information on is that a lot of the Negro people came there from the Arab slave trade, the Zanji people. But we know from the Bible that they were put in those lands, and a lot of that was the 10 tribes of the Northern Kingdom. They were put in those lands, and even through the series of conquering, because that was the same area of the Babylonians conquered, and the same area that the Persians had conquered as well. So even with all of that, a lot of the Hebrew people are still there as well. They are scattered into pretty much all the nations, but you will find them there. So, regardless of the fact that they're trying to say they were only there around the 8th century AD, they were there prior to that. Because this captivity, where they initially were sent into Assyria, happened, I believe, around 700 BC. So I will give you the dates and put that up for you as well. But it happened around 700 BC time frame. So this is way before the Arab slave trade came into play. But yeah, and so I did a search, and you will find these people in these lands. So I just wanted to point that out as well. We are everywhere, not just in Americas. Now, I'm not saying that I know who is what tribe, because I don't fully know. I don't think any of us really know the whole scope. We can have an idea because, as we can tell by First Chronicles chapter 5, verse 26, the Gadites, the tribe of Manasseh, half the tribe of Manasseh, and the Reubenites are in those locations to this very day. So the parallel lesson for this one, or the parallel nugget that I wanted to point out or highlight, is the fact that in the Bible, it tells you that Hebrew people will go into captivity into the land of Assyria, and they will be there to this day. And if you do your research, there are Negro people also who happen to be in that same area and were there because of captivity, and they're there to this day. So, a parallel that is not to be ignored.
سالار شرفته به یک قرار رسیدو تو ترک نه ایگاه کار دونه به ترکن ایگاه دونه ایگاه حالا که دونه ای بابا تام ما گپن داریم گلغا نداریم ایگه نه چی شوا شده بابا ایتا مرکز سالار شرفته یک قرار رسیدو تو ترک نه ایگاه کار کنیم ترک بره عقب بابا بره عقب بره عقب ایگاه حالا که دونه بوده وسط گله یا تا کار خوب به خواه بره یه رو کاری واقعا که بره دیگه اوسه ایگاه تو مال کلکادی نه ایگاه کار فهمی ایگاه وسط گله به سخت باره
Another parallel is we'll address a name. And what's in a name? Well, there are so many wonderful sisters and brothers on the Hebrew community and the Yahudim who definitely do videos to tell you the importance of the name and learning the name Yahweh. That's why I'm trying to use this name more. And they'll even point out to you, and I'll have to do a video to do more research on it, but that's not the core of this video. But they'll point out to you how many of the Hebrews named their children. Their names were given, they had a meaning to their names. Usually what you'll find is the word Yah attached to a lot of the Hebrew names because it was saying, God sees, God hears, things like that. And so it was the word or whatever the action was in the name, and then they had Yah attached to it, and anyway, that was just a Hebrew culture, and you can kind of see that in the Bible. Now, as I go through this journey, I'm even understanding a lot about our Bible and our names and things that were changed. But I'm not saying not to read the King James. I still read the King James, but there's a lot to be addressed concerning that. But either way, the point of what I'm saying is that the Hebrews had a tendency to incorporate the word Yah, God, into the name of their descendants. And what I find is that when we went into captivity, our names were changed and we were not allowed to read. I find that very interesting. And in addition to that, when our names were changed and we weren't allowed to read, we ended up losing our history. And I find it funny because if you look at the parallel, you have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These were not their Hebrew names. Their names were changed as well when they went into Babylonian captivity. And that's what we'll see is a parallel between the name changes.
Anyone looks away takes a turn. Toby, I'm going to give you a chance to avoid this. Maybe Mr. Waller will let everyone enjoy this blessed day. I want you healthy, so you'll work hard. And all you have to do is tell me your name.
I'm Kunta Kinte. Son of a...
Your name is Toby. Now tell me your name.
I'm Kunta Kinte.
That's not your name. Toby's your name. Now what is your name?
Say it. Kunta Kinte.
Toby's your name. Now I'll ask you again. Tell me your name. Say it! Say it! Say it! Toby!
Say it. Kunta Kinte.
Toby! It's Toby! Now say it! Toby! Damn you!
Please!
Black liquor bastard. You will not move from here till you say your name. Not if night falls or a new day comes. And you will say Toby. Say it. Say it! Say it! Say it!
Tomorrow I heard my boy.
Please. I'm here.
No, Benta. I can't see our boy. I've looked for him everywhere.
Say it,
He isn't coming home.
Say it! Say it! Say it! Say it! Say your name. Your owner's wife chose for you. Say your name so you know this ain't Africa. This is Virginia, and you're the property of John Waller, like the horses and hogs, nothing more. Say your name so you know what you are.
Kunta Kinte.
Say it. Say it. Say it! Say it! Say your name! Say it! Say Toby! Tell me your name! Say it, damn you! Hey, Toby, just say your name!
He said it.
Say it again. Louder. What's your name? What's your name?
He said it. That's what I said.
Lastly, addressing names. So I wanted to look further into the names, and so I looked into the registry of the transatlantic slave trade and the names that were the original names of a lot of the slaves before their names were changed. And just like in the Bible, you will find a lot of them have names with the name Yah attached to it. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the Bibles that we read, I hate to say, the names have been altered, and the name Yah has definitely been concealed. Now, again, I still recommend the King James Bible. It is still a valid Bible to read, but we have to understand what is going on. And again, I will do a video addressing that, and there are wonderful Hebrew um, teachers that are explaining that and sharing that as well. And I'll put a video compilation that puts it all together so that it's easier to understand. But nonetheless, yes, when you look at the Hebrew, the African and I hate calling it Africans because it's misleading. The Negroes that went into captivity, they will have a lot of names with the name Yah attached to it. Now, we also know about the fact that Yahweh tells us, I know those who claim to be Jews but are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. And so that's revealed in Revelations chapter 2, verse 9, and Revelations chapter 3, verse 9. That they're basically imposters masquerading or pretending to be us, pretending to be the bloodline. Because yes, we do adopt the Gentiles. Anyone that wants to come in among the children of Israel can be adopted in, and they will be entitled to the same everything, privileges and rights that we have is the same heritage and inheritance that we have as bloodborn Hebrews who are following the ways of Yahushua. So not the bloodborn Hebrews that are false, spreading lies and doing wickedness. No, no. But again, that too has to be addressed in another video. I hate saying that a lot, so I'm going to try to calm down on that. But nonetheless, what I'm saying is that, so I looked into the names, and what I found is that, first of all, when you look into the European Jews, and I don't want to spend too much time addressing this, but with the European Jews, they already have this thing about their names. Well, a lot of their supposed Jewish heritage is attached to their surnames. Even though they'll tell you that a lot of their surnames, they've changed them to European names. But see, they're saying they changed them. Our names were forced upon us, but that's another story. But yeah, so they changed it. And so anyway, trying to do a search, they have over 40 different databases with European names, Italian, German, so on and so forth, which I don't see how any of this connects to original Hebrew names, but nonetheless, they have a series of different names. So I just looked into the German database, or, the German names, and I did a search. And of all of the 20,888 names just listed there, I was only able to find the name Yah one time. One time was I able to find the name Yah among European Jews. But when I did a search of the Negroes that were put into slavery and captivity in the transatlantic slave trade, I found 822 names that included the word Yah. And I'm sure there are many more. But that's what I came up with at this particular point. And I did the search, and I'm even showing you how to do the search if you're interested. But yeah, so What another biblical parallel? We have a tendency as Negro people, before captivity, before false names were forced upon us, before we were forced to forget who we are, we already were naming our children in a way that gave praise and glory and honor to Yah. All right. That's all I have for this one. There will be a part 2 concerning the biblical parallels of slavery. Thank you for watching and take care.